Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
Doing well, King. Good to see you and eager to engage in another Wednesday morning conversation.
Absolutely. So am I. So am I. And you know how we normally like to get things started. Well, I wanted to add this new element we did last week, and I wanted to make it a part of the weekly procedures or protocol of our show. That is to ask, your spiritual energy level today. Again, it's just really today in the moment, meaning, from a number from 0 being life sucks to 10 being life is awesome. Where do you see yourself fitting in at right now?
Yeah, this morning is good. I have that hesitation of saying 10, because for me, 10 means there's no room for improvement. I can't get any better. But I'm definitely at a 9 or a 10. So I'm in a really good place energetically this morning. And so I'm happy to be able to say that.
Excellent. Just on that point real quick before we get into the other area of our show, I always ask that question. And what's always interesting to me is how people perceive that answer or when they get that answer. Like some folks say, well, I don't want to be a 10 because I don't believe there's room for, I don't want to say I'm a 10 because I think there's room for growth, or I don't want to seem like I'm perfect. Well, other people will say I'm a 15, I'm a 20. Mm-hmm. So it varies along that spectrum of people will say I'm beyond 10. And I just want to throw in my perspective. And again, it's not to change your mind, but just my perspective on the question. What I've learned is that number really is about choice, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not like you're stuck there. It's what you choose to be by your understanding of your ability to make that decision yourself. Now, for me, with that being said, the engineer in me, when I came up with that model, I was always in the standpoint that I always want to be a 10 because I don't see the value of being anything less. Not to say I'm always am a 10, because I got to look at what gets me to a 10, and that's the quest. Okay, if I'm an 8, what would get me to a 10? Would it be, and it's usually not something external, because if it's external, then that number can vary. I could be a 5, I could say I could be a 10, but then if I get put over by the police and they spend the night in jail, now I'm a 4, right? And I can't give someone external to me that kind of power. So I always choose to be a 10 because, like I said, my engineering me, I don't see the value in choosing any less number. Not that I'm perfect. It's just that that's the goal I'm on. I want to be a 10. I'm going to strive to be a 10. Not that I'm a 10 all day. It's just in the moment of that question, I'm going to be a 10. And that's like my true north. What can I do to always stay at 10 and stay on that path? So I just wanted to share my thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective too. So now I feel guilty saying 9 or 10. No, I'm just...
And, which is an excellent segue into our next section, which is talk about a gratitude moment. And the reason I'm always a 10, or for the most days, I shouldn't say always a 10, what helps me get to be a 10, I should say, let me phrase it in that context, is being grateful and being gracious. And the things that cause me to be grateful, my life, my health, my ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, have a sound mind, have a mother who's alive, who has a sound mind, still has a giving heart, and roof over my head, folks who are willing to work with me and extend trust to me, the problems that I'm facing in my life, and the things that I learn on a daily basis. So I'm grateful for all of that because it's just, and I guess it becomes getting older. I took this for granted when I was younger, but learning something new is just a phenomenal thing now. And it's just something to look forward to where I could just learn something. So I've just been learning lately the power behind YouTube's algorithm of when to post, how to post, how YouTube actually tries based on its algorithm to find your audience for you, to help your audience grow. But you have to post it at certain times and follow certain rules. But once you follow those rules, then YouTube actually will go out and look for your audience for you, as opposed to you trying to convince other people, watch my video. It might be somebody who's a friend, but your video may not necessarily be what they're interested in, and they might not watch it all the way through. So it's just really been a learning experience. I'm just grateful to really really begin to learn this new YouTube algorithm and the process for really understanding how to post and when to post videos. So those things I'm grateful for.
Yeah, actually, I'm grateful for just that little lesson you just spoke about YouTube and the algorithms. That's great. But more specifically for me, I mean, my ongoing gratefulness is for indoor plumbing and a refrigerator with mostly fresh food in it. That my entire life I've had those two things, and that makes me a mind. We don't sometimes we forget this, but it makes us, I'll say, a specific kind of minority on the planet, because a lot of people, billions of people, don't have indoor plumbing and electricity with fresh food. Sometimes the food they eat probably is healthier than what's in my refrigerator.
That's true.
But still, there are certain reasons in a 4-season climate where having a refrigerator is really useful. And then just for my general good health, mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual health, I'm just really grateful day to day that I function more or less well, and I get to do what's important to me, what I think is my, what Bill Plotkin calls my unique ecological niche, and I'm not kind of stuck in doing work in order to make money that makes money for somebody else, a job that somebody else created that, I become a peg in their pegboard. So I'm just grateful for all of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I concur on some of the things that you mentioned. I didn't mention, and it's not that I realize it's not trying to mention every single thing that you're grateful for,
right,
but it's more about just being grateful. As opposed to, you can only mention one thing, but you're in that moment of being gratitude. I think that the energy just attracts great things in your life. At least that's what my experience has been.
Yeah, no, I agree. Living a grateful life, as opposed to being able to name 10 or 100 or 1,000 things I'm grateful for, is I think the best way to hold that. So you wake up in the morning, and there's a great scene, and this is just coming from me from a movie, the Milagro Beanfield War. It was directed by Robert Redford. I'm not going to try to remember everybody in the cast. It's probably 30 years old by now. But there's an old Mexican guy whose name I believe is Amarante in the movie, and he's kind of the village elder, the town elder. And it's in New Mexico. It takes place, and every morning he gets up in this little hut that he lives in, and he goes over to a mirror, and he looks in the mirror and looks at himself, washes his face, and he says, "Thank you, God, for giving me another day." So that's how he begins his day, because he knows he's old, he knows he's going to die at some point, but he begins every day with that. And the movie is actually a great movie for other reasons, but I won't get into that. But that's it. He lives a life of gratitude. Yeah, that's what he does. So.
Well, thank you for that, Reggie. Thank you for sharing that. Again, thank you for bringing your energy at 9 on each and every time we do our podcast. That helps keeps the content rich, keeps my energy at 10, and just really helps us produce a great show. So with that being said, why don't you go ahead and set the context for today's show?
Yeah. So as those of you who have tuned in before, we're speaking about the content of my book, which came out in late 2022, Healing America's Narratives, The Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, Becoming More Fully Human. And in the book, I identify 9 elements of America's shadow, and shadow being the part of an individual, an organization, or in this case, a nation that is invisible, that is denied, is repressed, that is not owned by the individual, the organization, or the nation. And the 9 traits of shadow that we look at in the book, both historically and currently, are ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, untrustworthiness, and bullying. And again, we're not saying that the United States is characterized by those 9 traits. We're saying that the United States has a shadow, a part of its history that it denies, part of its current event that it denies, that is characterized by those 9 traits. And so what we're going to do today is take a deeper dive into one of them. We're going to do this over the next few sessions. And today we're going to take a close look at ignorance as a trait of the American shadow. And we've discussed in the past, and other people have asked me the question, which do you think is the most important shadow trait, or the most the one that influences the others most? And I'm hesitant to say that there's one, because once they're out there, they feed on each other. But I'm leaning more and more towards ignorance as kind of a foundational moment, because ignorance, and again, all that means is not knowing. So ignorance isn't a bad thing ordinarily. It just means I don't know. Best place to learn from I don't know mind. But if I'm ignorant of something and I'm in a position where I know I don't know, and I feel like I have a big ego and I need to defend myself, that can lead to arrogance. It can lead to fear of what I don't know about, and it can lead to bigotry and violence. So ignorance feels foundational. Historically, just a couple of examples, and these are all in the book, and you and I have spoken about these in the past in for other reasons. So basically, historically, men have been ignorant of women, thinking that they're inferior creatures to us. And that goes as far back to the Judeo-Christian tradition in the Bible, because God made Eve from one of Adam's ribs, and she was told to basically be subservient to him. Oops. When the Europeans, explorers turned colonizers, bumped into the people of the African continent, they were ignorant of those cultures, and they assumed, rather than let's have a cultural exchange, let's see what they know and what we know, the Europeans assumed that they were superior, and so they enslaved them, kidnapped them and enslaved them, based in ignorance. When they arrived in the North American, or the Americas, basically North, South, and Central America, ignorant of the indigenous people there, again assuming that the Europeans were superior, they subjugated them. They attacked them, they stole their land, etc. So ignorance again. Did the same thing in Vietnam, fast forward into the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Ignorant of the culture there, went to war to try to force democracy. Just think of that phrase, forced democracy onto somebody. And then right up to today, I'm just going to fast forward to current times, where the polarization of the left and right, the 2 simplest examples for me right now are people who criticize critical race theory and wokeness. And when asked what they mean by critical race theory or wokeness, can't define or explain either one. So they're ignorant of this thing they've been conditioned to dislike and protest against. Now, I'm not saying that everyone who criticize wokeness and critical race theory can't explain them, but many people can't. One poor woman wrote a book about it because she didn't like what was happening in her kid's school, and I forget the name of it. And when asked in a friendly interview, not an antagonistic interview, so just so we understand, what do you mean by woke? She couldn't do it. She had a book in print. So that's ignorance. And again, ignorance can be the best place to learn from, or it can be the worst place to live from. Years ago, I'll just bring this full circle now. M. Scott Peck, who was a psychiatrist who became a best-selling author in the 1970s with a book entitled The Road Less Traveled, which spent over 10 years on a New York Times bestseller list, and he published some others after them. He defined evil in his writing. He defined evil as militant ignorance of the shadow. So you don't know there's a shadow there. You don't know what you don't know, basically, the invisible stuff. But he called it militant ignorance. So in other words, it's an ignorance that the person works hard to keep and resists any opportunity to find out. to learn about and to move from a place of ignorance on whatever topic it happens to be. So evil as militant ignorance. So Hitler had a level of militant ignorance if we define him as evil, as other people have. So it's a real interesting place, this ignorant place, because it can be a really healthy realization. Oh, I don't know about that. I'm going to find out, as you were just saying in your check-in, about the gratitude for learning and learning about the algorithm and how it works and the best way to use it. So I'll put a pin in it there. So we're going to take a close look at ignorance as an element, and perhaps the foundational element. I'm not sure about that, but leaning in that direction of the collective American shadow.
Well, thank you. I think it's a great topic, as usual. And I remember it takes me back when I was young, and the first time I heard the word ignorant, the way it was used, it felt like an insult. Yep. And part of me, when I still hear it, it sounds like an insult. You're ignorant, and immediately you want to defend yourself, because I remember before I really understood the definition, it was a synonym for stupid. Yep. You're ignorant and you're stupid. Yeah. Or you stupid. It kind of went hand in hand. Right. And I really love what you said, and I'm going to use it as a quote. So I want to make sure, I definitely give you credit if you are the author of it. You said it could be a great place to learn from, or a bad place to live from. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, I mean, I said something like that. So that's my thought. I don't think I'm the first person to ever have that thought, but that's something that I didn't read that somewhere. I just know that it's true from living my life, that when I'm ignorant, I can really learn a lot, or I can, just live from ignorance, which is not a good way to live.
Well, see, I think it really encompasses the definition in a very profound way. It takes away the energy of the insult when you define it that way. So I think it's a beautiful way to encapsulate it. Yeah. Because, as you say, it can be a great way, to learn from. I'm ignorant, and I talked about before, being ignorant of how YouTube worked, believing that, YouTube was something you could it was the best way to do it, was just put up unlimited videos, as much videos as you possibly can, and eventually it's something to click, and you learn that, no, that's not how it works. Actually, that's disadvantage of how it works. It's more about timing. It's more about momentum, and allowing you to really learn kind of what your target audience is based on how you select your keywords and so on and so forth. But now, looking at ignorance as a context of in today's society, and I give an example of a podcast I just recently watched, and what I was how most of us are ignorant to how police think. Mm-hmm. And it's a gentleman who's an actor who I really enjoy his movies, and he's doing a podcast now. Because everyone's doing podcasts. That's why I really love YouTube, because now it gives everybody the opportunity to get engaged with people at a whole different level. That's one of the best things about COVID that I think brought forth, was people just started doing podcasts and got a chance to really see who the individuals are. But anyway, the actor is John Bernthal, and I don't know if you all know who he is, but he's a gentleman who played The Walking Dead. He played the Punisher on Netflix's Punisher, and he played recently like a full biopic on Netflix. I'm sorry, on HBO, called "We Own This City," or "We Run This City." We own this city. We run this city. Anyway, he plays a police officer. So he's interviewing a Baltimore police officer, and I've seen that clip for his video, and I watched several other podcasts. He's done about maybe 40 or 50 podcasts, and I refused to watch that because I was like, I know what a Baltimore police officer would say. So for a whole year, I just didn't watch it. And then I finally watched it yesterday, and I was ignorant to how police officers think. And again, I'm a son of a police officer, so I believe I thought I knew. And this is one of the best interviews I've seen him give. He's a police officer, and he said it. He's known in his community. He's from Baltimore. He's respected in the police force, but he's also very respected in the community. That's how he pretty much sets his intro up. And where I'm going with this is how much I learned from listening to this officer talk about being from a community and his view of policing and how he views interacting with different people in the community and how he was trained. And I was like, I wish every police officer can listen to his perspective. So much can be learned from it, because the way he talked about training, it made sense. The way he talked about interacting with the community, it made sense. And not being trained, like he says, I learned myself jujitsu. I learned myself how to handle myself. So when I'm in certain situations, I don't fear the other person. So there's no need for me to grab my gun. With other officers who haven't been trained, and the police don't really train you on that, and they blame the department for not training. But he said, but if you're going to put yourself in that kind of position, I think it's the onus upon you to learn how to survive in situations. So where I'm going with this is, I was totally ignorant to how the police officer felt and thought, and learned that I began to see the humanity in the police officer. He talked about seeing humanity in the community. And to me, that's when you begin to understand and take away ego, and you realize you are ignorant about certain things, about people's culture, about people's past, about people's morals, or just the fact of your ego is dominating you, making you think you're better, then that's what leads to, as you say, the other 8 elements. The arrogance now at that point, then it can get to be greed and it's, selfishness. I don't know if that's one of them. I need to learn the 9 as well. But where I'm going with this is the power of understanding your ignorance. To me, I can see why you said that might be one of the first or a key of the 9 elements to really begin to master. Because once you put yourself on that journey and you ask yourself this key critical question, what am I ignorant of as relates to interacting with an individual, with a different marginalized group? What am I ignorant of? Because you can look at it from a context of nowadays, you kind of been forced to accept a marginalized group, whether you want to or not. And you start to see it dominate a news cycle, and they're painting this marginalized group as a victim, and you begin to start letting ego and arrogance kick in, and your natural reaction is to repel against it. But if you take a moment and say, what am I ignorant of? Let me see what I can learn about this marginalized group. Why are they marginalized? What is their pain that they're suffering from? What has been the tragedy that they experienced? Your book helps illustrate that as it relates to Native Americans, the war, African Americans enslaved. It helps women. It helps you begin to get the empathy around those different marginalized groups and begin to start to push you on that journey to become more fully human.
Yeah, so there's a lot in there. I actually want to go back to how you began. So I love the example of how you resisted watching that particular interview because you knew how the cops, how the police think, and you didn't want to, listen to that particular one, and you went in and you really learned. But the idea that YouTube makes all of this available, especially post-COVID, during COVID, when people started doing podcasts and all that. So I want to follow that thread a little bit with regard to kind of the bigger picture of ignorance. And part of what I'm going to say now is loosely based on what I've been learning from Daniel Smachtenberger, guy that you and I, spoke about a little bit, and some of his work with, systems. And he just has this amazing mind in my experience. But, he made it really clear, and Smachtenberger says this is my take on it now, that even prior to COVID, the nation was becoming increasingly polarized. Even prior to Donald Trump, the nation was fairly polarized. So suddenly we had a polarized nation, a new president who further polarized it. Like him or not, the polarization took place, and that was because the left pushed back on the right, et cetera. But that took place. And then suddenly we had this virus that some people thought, wow, something for everyone to be concerned about. It doesn't just affect the right. It doesn't affect the left. It doesn't just affect America. It affects everyone. So maybe we can come together and fight this. And in fact, we fell further apart because we disagreed on lockdowns, on vaccinations, on masks, on who should go to work, who's an essential worker. So the polarization didn't care about COVID and a common enemy. It just kept on getting further polarized. And because people were locked in their houses or their apartments, unless they were considered essential workers, they were scared because at the beginning, you don't know how bad it's going to be. Am I going to die was a legitimate question for a lot of people, especially older folks. And I was in that category, not in the oldest group, but I was over 65. And so it was a really scary moment. And Schmachtenberger makes the point that once the lockdown happened and people, we don't have our regular socializing, so we don't hang out with our friends the way we used to. We're, some of the good things that you talked about, people started doing podcasts so we could get more information out there. Had a downside because the in-person socialization was gone. And he makes the point with more evidence than I'm going to be able to share right now, that at some point, people taking to the streets and rioting was going to happen. They needed a flame. They needed a catalyst. And Derek Chauvin killing George Floyd over the course of almost 9 minutes while the cameras were running in broad daylight in Minneapolis provided the flame. So people took to the streets. Now, here's where the ignorance comes in. So when that happens, right, you see a white man, you see a white police officer. So you see a police officer who's white killing a man who's black, aided by 3 other police officers who are of mixed race. And this is where Schmachtenberger makes the point. We're going back to YouTube. So if you start looking for videos, once George Floyd is dead, and once the riots are taking place, and there's all these peaceful riots across the country, hundreds of thousands of people across the country. There were some riots when there were some fires and some vandalism and looting. Minimal, if you search the evidence, that was minimal compared to the peaceful protests. But if you were a white supremacist leaning conservative in America, doesn't matter what state you were in, and you were looking for information, whether you did it on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or other sources of news, each time you clicked on something, because we tend to click on whatever our amygdala, our reptilian brainstem, our snake brain gets agitated by. So we tend to click on things that either anger us or that we agree with. So we either get the joy or the rage. So if this white supremacist, and I'm going to an extreme here to make the point, but if this is someone who didn't really mind watching a black man get killed on video, every time he clicks, the algorithm is going to remember him, and it's going to give him more things that either anger him or that he agrees with. So he's going to get a view of that day that's going to kind of defend the police in some ways. And right after that, there weren't a lot of those out there because most police forces weren't defending what Derek Chauvin did. But he's going to get just fed more and more that support his white supremacists, support the police, kill another black guy. If you were a more left-leaning person who had been protesting against police officers killing unarmed black men for some years and against police tactics in general, and you kept clicking to get more information, you were going to get fed a whole different series of videos and news reports that were leaning a different way. So after a week or so, after a day or so, depending on how long you're on there, these two people have extraordinarily different sources of information and are, in effect, in a world where we're locked down, are living in 2 entirely different worlds. Another way to say that is they both have skewed visions of what happened because neither of them was there. Neither of them witnessed what happened to George Floyd. and let's assume for a second neither of them was present in a riot or a protest. They got all their information online. So absent, and this is the problem with the blessings of YouTube. This is the problem of social media sites. It used to be that somebody was responsible for curating what we saw on network news back when you and I were kids, when I was a kid anyway. And if you got it wrong, you apologized and you owned it. And the major networks did that. The major newspapers did that. We got this wrong, we run a correction. Nowadays, there's no, they're trying, but Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, they don't curate the news. They just repost it. And I can post anything I want up there for the most part. So what ends up happening is for folks who choose to get the news, which is not what you were talking about, but I'm speaking specifically about the news, the events of the day or the week from social media, they are, because of the way the algorithms work, they're forced into an extraordinarily bigoted view of the world that perpetuates ignorance. So, and that's a real dangerous thing. And it's one of the reasons that the First Amendment protections that our founding fathers gave us, they could not imagine the damage that could be done by perverse or intentionally false speech. Because the worst you could do when they wrote the Bill of Rights, worst you could do was go down to the village green and yell out all your biased stuff, whether you're biased liberally or conservatively, and maybe 30, 50, 150 people would hear you. And once you got done yelling, you had to be face to face with those people so they could push back.
Right.
Now, so what we're looking for here to try to remedy this is some kind of a system that still honors free speech, but also curates speech for its validity, its veracity, etc. Really complex issues to solve. So we have, and this is my take on it, we have these brilliant technical people who invented social media and manifested it and got very rich doing that, who really never quite figured out democracy 101. They didn't understand the impact of their tool on the democratic process. They were ignorant of that. So the ignorance appears in a lot of different places. And so I'm going to stop there because I kind of went in a variety of different directions. But the last thing I will say is, and this is one of the points that Schmachtenberger points to, is that one of the first things we really need to do in terms of trying to resolve the major problems of our time is revise how we solve problems. Because almost inevitably, if we resolve this issue, we either create another problem or we exacerbate an issue that already exists. We make it worse. So the ability to see and think within systems, which I'm pretty much ignorant of. I can articulate the basic argument, but to really apply it to supply chains, nuclear threats, climate change, viral warfare, chemical warfare, street violence, how policing is done, healthcare, all the issues we face right now, to really hold all of those, the vast majority of American citizens, global citizens, I would argue, but if we stay in this country, and even more importantly, the vast majority of elected officials and performance news celebrities who have the platforms are ignorant of all of that. They're in so far over their heads among all of that, and they have to make believe that they're not. If you want to get elected, you can't say, well, to be honest, everything's really complex right now and I'm in over my head, so I don't have the answers, which is true for everybody who holds a public office. There's not one person who holds all the answers. They don't. If they did, what are they waiting for? You know, that we just know from a human perspective, we know that. But because we live in this egocentric culture that's not based on really the common good, it's based on the good for some people and is grounded in greed and excess, but because we're really ignorant of that and we're stuck in our little encapsulated worldviews, um, we're all in over our heads. We're not willing to admit it. And um, our ignorance and our shame of our ignorance keeps us from moving forward. So, I mean, it's a major, to use the cliche, it's a wicked problem, and it's not a wicked problem. It's a wicked, multi-pronged or multipolar problem that's really pretty scary in many ways.
Absolutely. And then we live in a capitalistic system that profits off our ignorance. It's designed to profit off our ignorance.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the fact that two of the richest men in the world, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, what do they have in common? They both own media. Jeff Bezos went out and bought the Washington Post, and then Elon Musk went out and bought Twitter. And people talked about how ignorant it was and dumb for him to buy Twitter and financial loss, but they didn't really understand what his long-term thinking was. Because Elon Musk understood, unlike owning the Washington Post or New York Times or some form of media apparatus at that level, that's becoming outdated. People now consuming news and information from Twitter and from these other sources like that social media more so than they are going to the Washington Post website. If you look at people who are really, I think old school people like yourself or myself may say, if I really want to find out what's really happening, you might Google CNN.com, WashingtonPost.com, NewYorkTimes.com, etc. Well, everybody else is Facebook.com, Twitter.com. That's where they're getting that third-party news and information. So when people understand that, and we talked about this before last week, politicians also, the political system also benefits off people's ignorance.
Yeah.
They want you to be ignorant when you go to the polls to vote. They want you to vote based on identity politics, on the fact that, and unfortunately, that really runs rampant through my community, the Black community, where people are voting just because this person's, you've heard his name. So they stay out there visible, throughout the year by attending certain breakfasts that community associations may be having, kissing the babies, and they say visible. You don't question their political record or their politics, with regards to what their platform really represents. Yeah. They'll give you all the sound bites that you want to hear. Yeah, I'm gonna improve crime. I'm gonna improve the schools. I'm gonna reduce crime and improve the schools. I'm gonna bring jobs. Those talking points, and never really have a concrete plan on how they're gonna do any of those things. But because it sounds good and it feels good, and you hear this person's name, you're going to vote for him. I always felt that really the worst thing I hate about voting, as again being ignorant, we talk about ignorance, is when I go to polls to vote, and I'm either voting for, a congressperson or a presidential person or a mayor, city council person, and then I'm hit with this ballot of judges that I never heard of before. Yeah. And I got to choose right in that moment that I want to vote for this judge or not, and I hate that because it's like, I have a personal bias against judges. I think the judges have extremely too much power in this country for someone who can be flammable and not trying to be fully human and not trying to constantly improve themselves, but they have their own biases and they're going to stay with their biases on how they rule. So now and it could be, there's a lot of bad judges out there, and I'm pretty much probably voting this judge back in, unbeknownst to myself, because of my ignorance to that. And that's one of the things I have about, on a quick, as I get on my soapbox about this, that's one of the biggest issues I have about our political system, is because all the folks who consider themselves to be getting the word out and encouraging people to vote and trying to enlighten you on who the best politicians are, etc., They never want to educate you on who the judges are. And to me, that has a much more direct impact on your life than this politician will, who is pretty much going to just maintain the status quo and not bring anything totally radical. He may, add a bike lane or, increase, you know, a certain part day cleanup, some things like that, but they're not going to have the impact the judges do. So that's why I'm a advocate behind don't be ignorant of how social media works. Like at this stage in our lives, as integral as social media is to how we function as a society, you cannot afford to be ignorant to not understand. You go to Facebook, what appears on your wall, why it appears, what algorithm is Facebook using to get that information to you. Because you may have over 500 friends, but Facebook is deciding which of your friends they're going to allow you to see what they post on. You're not seeing all 500. You can scroll for 5 days, and you're only going to see certain friends that their content get repeated. Understand why that is. Not just from a business context, which is why I started studying it, but just understanding of why you're being fed this information. Because to your point, it's going to trigger you one way or another. It's going to either trigger you to make you feel more, okay, there are folks who are in line with me and we have things in common. That makes me feel better. I'm not alone. Or it's going to trigger me to make me feel as though, why am I watching it? Like, for example, I choose not to watch now. And there's certain people out there who create their channels on YouTube to be profitable, obviously, call themselves a news source. And all the news they always want to point out is Black folks being victims of things, racial profiling, racial discrimination. That's all they want to talk about. And it's like, I don't want to consume myself with that all the time. That's not, most of the time I don't want to watch that because that's not the space I want to be in mentally. Because if I'm in a victimization space, then I'm no longer creative, right? Because now I'm thinking about how the world is attacking me and my people, and I'm putting myself in that group dynamic, and I'm accepting that there's nothing that Black folks can do ever in this country that's ever going to be just and that's right. Then go down that slippery slope. Now that's going to lead me to want to drink, want to smoke, want to align myself with other folks who think that way, and our escape is going to be some type of vice. And to me, that's a system that folks don't realize they're perpetuating. They think they're doing great by sharing all this news, but at the end of the day, I'm always looking at the value proposition. Is it, I look at, I always like to look at things in black and white terms. Either it's on or it's off. Either it's good or it's bad, and how you receive it. Now, I know there's some gray areas in there, and I'm sure there's some, things that are not clearly defined in that way. But for me, as an engineer, it's easier for me to process things when I put it in that context. Is this good for me or is this bad for me? How does this benefit me accessing this information and knowing this information? Is it going to bring joy to my spirit? Is it going to make me look at the world in a more loving space, or is it going to make me feel that I got to look at the world through a negative space? And if, to your point of what you said before about the YouTube algorithm doing the George Floyd thing, and YouTube, definitely, aids that. But if I want to sit here and just look at and just get fed nothing but the world is full of race bigots and Black people are going to always be marginalized and oppressed, then YouTube will gladly feed me that, and everybody who's posting that. And that's going to reinforce that position and that mentality and that attitude. So now when I go out into the world, I'm not going to be as creative. I'm not going to be as productive. I'm going to be, unless I'm creating content around that I can generate revenue. But you're not making the world a better place, because everybody is not evil. Everyone is not corrupt. Like I said before, I think one of the worst things my community does is, and I blame our leadership for it, is to always talk about generalities when we say police are bad, as though we're saying that all police are bad. So even the good ones now have to wear that bad moniker when they're not necessarily bad. And to be a police, when you really understand that, to be a police officer, when you accept that and you generally want to go out here and do good, how difficult it is to not only walk within that blue culture that you got to deal with of the corrupt culture that's there, and you try to fight and navigate through that world. But then you got to fight and navigate through the world of your community not accepting you, not liking you, and the world telling you that you're bad. And so why would you even want a job where if you do make a mistake because you haven't been trained properly or whatever the case may be victimized and even go to jail, on top of the fact you may lose your life. So now it's going to turn off a person who generally is going to be good, and the only people you're going to be really attract to that kind of position are going to be the ones that do it with an agenda. Yeah, I want that power. I want the ability to go ahead and either I don't like that community or I don't like who you consider to be assholes. Now I can go out here and I can, have my power and inflict my authority over those individuals who I don't like because I wear this uniform. Yeah. And that's what you're creating. You're breeding those kind of individuals, right? And that's what I say. It goes back to, again, ignorance at the corner. At the end of the day, the key question that I want everyone to think about is, ask yourself, what are you ignorant? What are you ignorant of today? Right? And of course, we're ignorant on a lot of things. We're ignorant on how our bodies work, the health. We're ignorant on how our cars work, how our mortgages are structured. We're ignorant about a lot of things. And you can't change your ignorance about everything in one given day. But every single day, you can become smarter and wiser about something if you start putting yourself on the path of saying, I want to become more fully human. I want to start living in more of a love mentality. I want to connect and align myself with folks who are thinking justice and want to do things around the energy of love and servitude. And you make those kind of statements, that to me is where you begin to start to look for ways to shed the ignorance.
Yeah. And so the question comes up for me, and I love everything that you pointed to there. And this is not a question to you, and it's not a question I think that we can really answer together. Maybe we can. Maybe I'm just ignorant of how good we really are. I don't know. But what is it then? Going back to parenting, because the first shot any of us has at learning that learning is a good thing is with our parents, whether we're fortunate enough to have two more or less loving parents who, do their best and take pretty good care of us, whether we have just one parent, whether we're, unfortunately stuck in a house where there's violence or abuse, but we have parents. It begins there. Then we have early schooling. So, what is it that leads some of us? And this is the question that I always think about, because I don't know that anybody has addressed this. Some of us to go out there and get our education, whatever that means, get work, make some money, maybe get married, raise kids or whatever, and continue to want to learn. And what leads others of us to get our formal education, get out, get a job, maybe get married, maybe raise a family, and be done learning. So what happens there? Because coming back full circle to what you said about the judges, even, one of the major failings of American democracy, and I'm part of that failure. I don't think I'm in the worst part of the failure, because I do some things I think have strengthening the democracy as one of my goals in terms of my writing and my poetry and my teaching. But I'm still not one of the leaders in this. Is democracy, and specifically a democratic republic, which is what we have, is a participatory style of government for it to work well. And just going to the poll every 2 years or every year in local elections is like the bare minimum. And I love the example of the judges, because I started doing this a few years ago when I realized, oh shit, here's that list of judges again. So part of it is, and it's not a lot of work. You go to your local polling place, or sometimes you can just go to their website if they have a good when it's organized, and you can take a look at the ballot for the next upcoming election and get the list of the judges and do your due diligence and read about them. Now that requires some time and effort to do that. The newspapers, some local newspapers do an adequate job with it, but you don't get all the information you want. And sometimes the newspapers are slightly skewed depending on who the publisher is and the editors are and all of that. So you're doing your own due diligence, but it was really clear. This is one of the quotes. In fact, the first thing that opens the book before we even get into the introduction is a quote from retired Supreme Court Justice David Souter. I'm just going to paraphrase it now, but he basically said, I don't worry about losing our democracy to an outside power through war or through he gave a lot of things he's not worried about. Basically, I worry that because of the level of, he called it civic ignorance, like how this stuff works. We have 3 branches of government. We have a system of, the Congress is bicameral. There's 2 houses. We have this, this tier of 3 levels, local, state, and federal government. And when people don't know who does what in the government, when something bad happens, they have a problem. They don't know who's responsible. They don't know who to ask and how to get help. What they want, and this is where education has failed us, and I don't mean public education per se, I mean my ability to find out what I need to find out. Because there are some places in the country where public education is impeccable, and there's other places where it's horrible, and there's a lot of in-between stuff. My ability to find out, he basically said, back to Justice Souter, that when people don't know how the government really works and who does what, and life is getting harder for them, and maybe there's another terrorist attack, or maybe there's another, a thing like COVID. He said this in 2012. He said, when they don't know how it works and it's not working well, at least for them, somebody's going to come along and say, this system is broken. I know how to fix it, and only I can fix it. And the people will then give that person the power. Now, he basically predicted, and this is an opinion of mine, he said that in 2012. He predicted Donald Trump's election, because that's almost exactly what Trump said. He basically said, the system is broken and I alone can fix it. I mean, I alone can fix it is a direct quote from what he said. So he had this view of himself that he was the guy that could fix America. The system is broken. He gets an A+ for that observation. It's not working well for everybody. All right. That's not the only thing he said that was true in my, I never liked him. That's my bias. But I can back it up. But I alone can fix it. If you live in a democracy, you run for the hills when somebody says that, because that's the language of a dictator, a fascist, an authoritarian leader. Call them what you want, but that's a really dangerous perspective. Only I know. And he obviously probably knew less than everybody in Congress, who weren't winning any prizes for their knowledge base either. But he didn't know anything about the Constitution or how the government worked. It was like the presidency was an entry-level position for governance for him, because running Trump Incorporated was not a democratic institution. He was effectively, it was incorporated, but he was a sole proprietor. He was the leader, and everybody did what he said, or they had to leave. So that's, he had no training in democracy. So this idea of civic ignorance, a specific type of ignorance, how this thing works, this 200, next week, we have our 247th birthday. Understanding how it works, is a big deal. And I'm not I'm not the front of the class with that. I don't think I'm anywhere near the back of the class either. But, doing our due diligence to understand the system, and working to change what has to be changed is a big part of it. But because of the way the system has been, most people are overwhelmed in their daily lives. Make enough money to pay the mortgage or the rent, raise the kids, pay for their educations, put food on the table. And then the acquisitive part of our, not inquisitive, but the acquisitive part of our culture, where, you need the next biggest TV, the next newest car, the next, which, the corporations that pretty much have the the strongest hold on the ears of our legislators. They live in a world that requires exponential growth in profits, in dividends for shareholders, in a nation and on a planet that has continually depleting resources. So they keep on trying to grow and grow and grow and grow as the resources necessary to do that dwindle and dwindle and dwindle and dwindle. And they don't stop. And that's ignorance. That's another brand of it. So it's the ignorant thing is a big deal, leading, feeding the greed and the arrogance and all of it. Okay, that was a bit of a rant. I'll stop.
You said a lot of things that I think is very important. With regards to Trump, I really believe that it wasn't coincidental. I don't think he actually took that from that quote from the Supreme Court justice. I think what Trump did, and again, I don't have any facts behind it other than just my analysis. I think he just basically surrounded himself with folks who are smarter than he was in that context. Someone probably pointed out to him, and what I think he understood was the fact that most people are ignorant, and if you tap into people's feelings, you can get people riled up. Like I know for a fact, in my community, I can jump on if I really want to get myself positioned quickly in my neighborhood or my community. I can look for a situation where either a white driver drives down the street and hits a black kid and kills them, or a police officer does something to assault a black kid and get that capture, and then really leverage that as my platform.
Yeah.
I would get eyes. I would get people to agree with me. I get people to lift me up without even knowing who I really am, without really examining me, just on the momentum and the energy of me tapping into their feelings about that situation. And I think that's what Trump tapped into. Then he took marketing, and he realized at the end of the day, politics don't. And I think Obama created this atmosphere that elections were no longer going to be about. The marketing had changed around elections based on social media, and he was able to leverage. Obviously, all this. So where I'm going with this is that's the danger of where we are. It's like the system is designed to take the next person who is going to be much more articulate than Donald Trump, much more strategic than Donald Trump, and he's going to be able to go ahead and capitalize it on another level. Because Donald Trump, I think he's gotten to the point where people are beginning to see all his fallacies and realize, he got his core base that really supports him ride or die. But I think most other people who voted for him in the past are starting to see the weakness in him and starting to see the errors and inefficiencies in him. Another person who's sitting back watching, I don't think it's DeSantis, because I think he made a critical mistake by defining his tribe too early. I think he should have kind of just watched the field and said, let me pick out one issue I'm going to really capture people on. And that's just my analysis. I could be wrong. But my point I'm going with this is that goes back to the system is designed to help us feed off each other's ignorance. But it's medical. You go to the doctor and you're completely ignorant to how your body works and everything else. You got to trust this person again who is getting paid by the insurance companies to subscribe certain medications to you. Like I said, you should see how many doctors' faces when I walk in at my age, and they ask me what medications you're on. And I was, at 54, I'm not on any, and they're astonished. And it's like, oh, we got to correct that. We got to get you on something. You need to be, you 54-year-old black man. You're not supposed to not be on any medication, right? So that's my little final point. But now as we kind of shift into the phase of our show where we want to kind of create some solutions, what do you see as ways that we can put ourselves on the right path to becoming less ignorant of some of these things we're dealing with?
Yeah, so two things come up to mind right away. One is a question that we used back when we were speaking specifically about how to work with shadow. And so one of the simple questions, I'm not going to speak about how to work with shadow, but a simple question to ask every day is, what am I missing? what am I not seeing? Another way to say is, what am I ignorant of? What am I not seeing is a softer way to ask the question. So I'm not calling myself ignorant, but the same question: what am I not seeing? The second thing to do, and this is a harder one, regardless of where one is on the political spectrum, go to the places that you think your opponents are on the political spectrum. So if you lean left, go to Fox News or Breitbart or Newsmax, whatever those are. If you lean right, go to MSNBC, CNN, Democracy Now, and some others. I don't know if that's a fair depiction, Democracy Now. And once a week, spend time on that opposing news source, or 1 week out of every month, do that. And it'll be difficult. It's really hard, but do it authentically. So really try to understand the arguments. Some of it's going to be bullshit. You don't have to take it as on face value, but try to understand what would lead people to think this way. Why is this attractive to a lot of people? And do that. Get an understanding of, you don't have to change your mind necessarily. You might in some areas, but probably not. But get an understanding of it. So you're no longer empirically ignorant. You at least have some knowledge of what's going on over there. It's not just what's fed to you through your news feed. So 2 things. Ask the question, what am I missing? And then spend some time on the opposition's news sources. And don't do it on social media. Like, don't do it on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Go to the actual sites. Go to Fox News. Go to Breitbart. Go to MSNBC and spend some time there. And it's not easy. It's not a pleasant experience but that'll also give you a sense of how locked in you are in your view. It's directly proportional to how locked in you are, how uncomfortable it's going to be. So I would say that those 2 things as practice, because we're not going to get anywhere until we start listening to each other from the polarization standpoint.
I agree. It takes a strong-willed person to do that.
Yeah.
But it also takes a person who realizes their self-acceptance of their weaknesses and their ignorance. Because you're right. I think it's a great idea. I think, and for me, I'm a person who loves data. Do it for what do you know right now, and get that data and see where you're influenced by what some of the things they're saying. But I would say also be open-minded too at the same time. Like, what can I learn as opposed to I'm going to do it, but I already know all the answers. I think that's what's dangerous when you walk into that situation and you think your mind is closed. You're not going to accept anything new, but you just go there to verify your point and stand on your position. But I think that's great advice. I think it's challenging, but I think the person who wants to become fully human, if you're accepting that as your quest, then you've already accepted the fact that you put yourself on the road less traveled for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And make sure you listen to the news too, not just the news commentary. So if you go to those different sources, find their newscast, which is separate from their commentary. I mean, you can listen to both, but hear how the news is delivered, not just how the commentary is delivered. Those are 2 separate things. And that is, I think, a point of ignorance in America, where a lot of people mistake, celebrity commentators with journalists, even if they began as journalists. They're not practicing journalism anymore. And that's a big mistake, I think.
Absolutely. You make. I think that's a great distinction within itself. I think you should do a master class on how to navigate that, because I think most people at this stage can't tell a difference.
Yeah.
But thank you for that. We reached the end of our show and the last section of our show, where now we want to kind of quickly share an example of someone, and it could be someone repeated before, who we believe, whether they're past or present, who exhibits the fully human characteristics and behaviors. I'll go first now. I want to say, I believe a person who, I might have said his name before, but I want to say his name now, is Napoleon Hill. And he comes to mind because I was in a conversation with a friend of mine, and we were talking about, again, the path to success. And I remember him turning me on to a book back in my 20s, Anthony Robbins, and he had a 30-day program. And that 30-day program put me, again, it's a series of tapes you listen to, and it says you will change your life. And you think it's going to happen instantaneous, but what you realize, no, what it does, it puts you in a path of thinking differently. And it begins to help you, to your point, start to become a critical thinker and put you on a path to begin to explore different information and receive different information. And I began to, from that, read Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, and just found his life to be fascinating, what he went through in his life. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to say this. I think a lot of people forget the title of that book. It's called Think and Grow Rich. And if you really begin to think first behind a lot of things, it will change or definitely limit a lot of the behaviors that people do without thinking. So Napoleon Hill to me was somebody who exhibited fully human because he committed to a lifetime of giving and serving and helping us begin to think about things differently.
Yeah, beautiful. I think, you and I may have, read that maybe around the same time. We're different ages, but and found Tony Robbins the same way. So the 30-day, I remember that. So I love that you shared that. So I'm going to honor Dr. Eduardo Duran, who I bumped into on a video, and I was taking a class on collective trauma some years ago, probably 2020 or 2021. It was, it was an online class, and he was one of the experts who was interviewed, and he's half Italian, not Italian American, but his mother was Italian. His father was a mixed Native American. I forget the exact nations that his father was from. And long story short, he ended up in the Navy during Vietnam. He's a Vietnam vet. He was over there during the war, came back, got his education, studied psychology, got a PhD, and ended up practicing in Native American communities, first in California, and then I don't know if he's in Wyoming for a while. I forget where he is now. It might be Colorado. I forget. But the things he said, where he was mixing Western psychology with Native American practice and views, dealing with trauma and how they were different but could be used to complement each other. And I just said, man, this guy's got it going on. And he primarily dealt with traumatized people, whether they were veterans or Native Americans who have, centuries of collective trauma. And I tried to find him online. He's like offline. So I really respected that. And finally I thought, I need to find an address for this guy. So I look and I find an address. Actually, it was in Montana. That's where it was. I wrote to him. I didn't think I'd have, and I get an email like a month later. And he thanked me for writing to him. I asked him if he would look at my manuscript. And he said, yeah, send it. And he did. And then he gave me a testimonial for it.
Wow.
But he brings this view of the world, and then specifically of helping people who have been traumatized, that has this wonderful intersection of modern, Western psychology and Native wisdom, and soul-based Native wisdom. That's just beautiful. In fact, I just want to say the name of his book out loud. I always forget the whole title. I just want to say it though. So his book is Healing the Soul Wound: Trauma-Informed Counseling for Indigenous Communities. So that's Eduardo Duran. But just what a wonderful kind of present human being he is. I've never met him in person. This is just based on correspondence and his writing. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And again, Reggie, I appreciate you constantly being present, being a 9 or a 10, and being someone who's committed to become a fully human in all your actions. And I appreciate that. I've learned a lot over the last year of knowing you. It's definitely been an educational journey that I appreciate and I'm grateful for. And I look forward to our conversations each week. And I'm sure our listening audience, whether they're listening on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitter, and whether you catch this live or you catch the replay, follow what Reggie suggests. Ignorance is definitely, obviously, one of the greatest enemies and issues that we see in our time today. And you see it prevalent in everything that we do. So that's work on becoming more fully human. And that journey, I believe, will put you on a path becoming less ignorant as you go about your day. And you're always going to be ignorant about certain things. But the goal, I believe, is to be less and less ignorant on a daily basis. Yeah. So thank you for that, Reggie. Thank you, listening audience. And until next Wednesday at 10 a.m., that's all continue to put ourselves on the journey to become more fully human.